Okay, so from the poor man we learned that all who suffer curses and injustice among us will stand before us in that other life?
Yes.
Okay. Go to the next paragraph then, where Chrysostom writes, says, "See the man and his works. Indeed, this also is theft, not to share one's possession." I mean, exactly what St. Basil says. "I shall bring you testimony from the divine scriptures." In other words, you're kind of surprised at what I'm saying here? Let me prove what I'm saying. All right? And so he quotes the wisdom of Sirach: "The earth has brought forth her increase, and you have not brought forth your tithes, but the theft of the poor is in your houses." And then he explains what that means. "Since you have not given the accustomed offerings," he says, "you have stolen the goods of the poor." And then he goes on and quotes, oh, sorry, that was Malachi. Then he goes on and quotes the wisdom of Sirach: "Deprive not the poor of his living. To deprive is to take what belongs to another, for it's called deprivation when we take and keep what belongs to others," etc., etc. Okay? Turn to the next page. And he says in the middle of that first paragraph, the paragraph that continued from the previous page, actually it's a little past the middle, "The rich man is a kind of steward of the money which is owed for distribution to the poor. He is directed to distribute it to his fellow servants who are in want." In other words, God gives him all of this stuff merely or solely for it to be distributed to others. His own goods are not his own, but belong to his fellow servants. Now again, remember, this is an everyday, ordinary, well, let me rephrase that. I was going to say everyday, ordinary priest who also just so happens to be Archbishop of Constantinople, so he's a high-ranking, everyday, ordinary priest, saying this. There's a lot of similarity in one sense between what Chrysostom says here and what the new Pope essentially is saying, Pope Francis, because he kind of takes the same tack. I mean, when he was Cardinal, Archbishop, whichever, in Buenos Aires, he would not live in the apartment of the Archbishop. In fact, he sold it. He lived in a little apartment. He took the tube. He took the bus, etc.
He read Les Miserables, didn't he? Like at least the first chapter.
"Therefore, let us use our goods sparingly as belonging to others, so that they may become our own." Use them sparingly so that they may become our own. What's he mean? He that would find his life must lose it?
I'm trying to think of how to phrase it, but there's a concept of ownership and being able to freely give.
Okay.
That it's truly a part of you. You own it by being able to let go of it.
To let go of it, yeah. I mean, it doesn't own him.
Yeah.
Okay? So, how shall we use them sparingly as belonging to others? Okay, whatever the riches and wealth are, when we do not spend them beyond our needs. Okay? When we do not spend our riches beyond what we truly need, rather than, 2 pairs of shoes or 3 pairs of shoes, having 1,000 pairs of shoes. When we do not spend them beyond our needs, and do not spend for our needs only, but give equal shares into the hands of the poor. In other words, if I'm going out shopping and I buy not only for myself, but then I buy for somebody else, essentially. All right? So, skip on down to the next paragraph. And he says, "It's also worth inquiring why the rich man does not see Lazarus with any other righteous man, but in the bosom of Abraham." Why? Because Abraham was hospitable. The rich man sees Lazarus with Abraham in order that Lazarus may convict him of inhospitality. But notice, in the parable, What does Lazarus say?
Nothing.
Nothing. Not a word. Nowhere. It's the rich man who speaks, and it's Abraham who speaks. Okay? So when he talks about how Abraham was hospitable, you have to go back and look at the life of Abraham. How was Abraham hospitable? When the three guys who come up and visit Abraham, when he's at what are called the Oaks of Mamre, which was a geographical sign point, in Abraham's day, so to speak. And he entertains these three individuals. It's only after a few moments or few minutes that Abraham suddenly realizes these three individuals that he is entertaining, they're not just three guys. Okay? The way the church, historically, both Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, has interpreted that is that those three individuals, they are an angelic manifestation of the Trinity. Okay? And what does he do? He prepares, he doesn't say, who are you, show me your papers, etc. So, it's a couple lines after that. After the part about in order that Lazarus may convict him of inhospitality. Although he had such a treasure and an aid to his salvation, that is, Lazarus, he, the rich man, passed him by every day and did not use in his need the poor man's help. In other words, Lazarus did not turn, the rich man did not turn Lazarus's aid to his own benefit. He ignored it. Okay? And so Chrysostom then goes on and talks about how Abraham did not behave that way. And he quotes St. Paul and he quotes some others. And then he says about a third of the way up from the bottom of page 51, it is great and remarkable, however, when we receive anyone who happens by, even outcasts and worthless people, with great goodwill. Okay, and when he means we receive, he means if they come knocking on our door. But he also means if you're just out walking, you're on the greenway, you're walking down the street or something, and somebody comes up and asks for help, for aid, for a handout. Okay? He says it's remarkable if we receive any of those people, whatever they are, with great goodwill. For this reason Christ said, as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. All right? Whoever causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for him to have a great millstone. Now, in that particular passage, what is Christ talking about? A child. Chrysostom, however, takes that and he conflates the passage in Matthew 25, verses 14 and following, with this passage in Matthew 18:6. And what he's saying is, not only are the children, but inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, everyone is, kind of in Christ's eyes, one of these little ones, and everyone is one of the least of these. As he says, everywhere Christ has much to say about the small and insignificant people. I was listening to the conversation as I came in. What's the point? What's the point about somebody coming into your home? Yeah, it's your roommate's house too. But it's your house and somebody comes in and they act like you do not exist. They're treating you like you are insignificant, like you are no one. Chrysostom's point is no one is no one. No one is insignificant. Okay? In C.S. Lewis's The Weight of Glory sermon, he says, you have never met an ordinary person. Every person is extraordinary. Okay? Every person is totally unique They are the only one like that will ever be. Athanasius kind of essentially gets at it when he talks about, the incarnation and that people being made in the image of God. Well, what does that mean? If each individual is, according to Athanasius and the other fathers, if each individual is made in the image of God, it doesn't mean each individual bears fully the image of God. It means each individual bears their particular aspect. So what happens then when that individual is removed? That aspect of an image of God gets iced, gets taken away. So then there's a lessening of the image of God in human society. Okay? If you wish to show kindness, and this is where, man, he really, I bet, stepped on a lot of toes. He would really step on a lot of toes in churches today. Because I've heard, not in my church, but I've heard others, members of my family talk exactly about this kind of stuff that he's going to get into now. If you wish to show kindness, you must not require an accounting of a person's life, but merely correct his poverty and fill his need. Give me a concrete example. What's he mean? What's he talking about?
My aunt standing on the side of the corner who is married to a man with a steady job and lives in a nice apartment and everything, and has a sign that says, she doesn't do this anymore. She did this when she was younger, but had a sign that said she was homeless and had 3 kids. And
okay. Okay, that's part of it. But when he's saying, do not require an accounting of a person's life. No questions asked. Because what you will hear a lot of people say today is, and believe me, every time when I'm in London, which is every other year, you will hear, the students will actually be told this in the orientation. Don't give anything to people on the streets asking for a handout. And the argument that will always be said is, you don't know what they're going to do with it. You don't know if they're going to use it to buy drugs. You don't know if they're going to use it to buy alcohol. You don't know if they're going to use it to buy X, Y, or Z.
Of course, I had a similar conversation with people talking about boycotting businesses and things like that. And, they get really up in arms about how do you continue to patronize this business because they do such and such and such with their profits. And I say, I go to movies, and every single actor in that movie gets a slice of those profits, and I have no idea what they're going to do with it. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact that some of them,
yeah, but that's there is a similarity, but there's a huge difference in that, those businesses, those corporations, those actors aren't sleeping on the street poor.
Right.
Where we stay in London, the dorms that we stay in, it's one of the campuses of King's College. It's King's College, Hampstead. Hampstead is one of the richest areas of London. We're in our dorms. You can get out that dorm and you can walk less than a mile and be at homes that are in the range of 10 to 20 million pounds. Okay, that's 17 to 30 million dollars. Okay? And yet, you walk a mile the other direction, and you go down Finchley Road, and you go to the O2 Center, which is where one of the tube stops is. You go down there, before you get to the tube stop, you will pass by, usually, at least 3 homeless. People who are sleeping under the overhang of a business, or sleeping in what's called the underpass, which is the tunnel that goes under the road. Okay, and literally, there's a piece of cardboard on the ground. There's a sleeping bag. There's been one guy there for several years with a dog. And every time, students will walk and they'll see him, and they will try to walk, as far away from him as possible. Okay, why? Because he might be a drug addict. He might be an alcoholic. The poor man has one plea, Chrysostom says. His want and his standing in need. His want, his lack. Do not require anything else from him. In other words, don't require from him a justification for his life. But even if he is the most wicked of all men and is at a loss for his necessary sustenance, let us free him from hunger. Okay, he's the most wicked of all men. Put a name. If he's the Osama bin Laden, if he's the Saddam Hussein, if he's, depending on your politics, the George Bush or the Barack Obama, or okay, if he's an axe murderer and he's hungry, Chrysostom says, feed him. Christ in that passage, in that parable of the Last Judgment, doesn't say, but first ask, are you good?
Yeah, make sure it's worth it.
Have you been to church? Can I feed you so you can go to church? Nothing like that, right? Christ commanded, be like your Father in heaven. He makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. So, when you see on earth, skipping about 4 lines, when you see on earth the man who has encountered the shipwreck of poverty, do not judge him. Okay, what did he say earlier? Previously in this homily, he talked about those who look at the poor guy living on the street and say, well, he's obviously done something to deserve this. Do not judge him. Do not seek an account of his life, but free him from his misfortune. Okay?
And judging him and seeking an account of his life are kind of almost the same thing.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're seeking an account, that means you're judging him.
Exactly.
That he may or may not be worthy of.
Exactly. Now, how much does this sound like a quote-unquote preacher? Okay? No judgment at all. Give him food and water. That's it. That's all he's saying. To interfere with his behavior and deeds. Well, let me back up. Free him from his misfortune. God has excused you from all officiousness and meddlesomeness. It's not up to you, in other words. How much most of us would complain if God had bidden us first to examine each person's life exactly, to interfere with his behavior and his deeds, and only then to give alms. I mean, it's like the government. What are you going to do with that? Why do you need that whatever thing? Chrysostom is saying, it's not up to us to know. It's not up to you, my audience, to know. And you have to imagine, if when he's delivering this, and I don't know when it was. I don't know if it was when he was, a priest in Antioch, or if it was when he was archbishop in Constantinople. But if he was archbishop in Constantinople, that's in other words like he was, if you're talking Catholic Church, like he's the Cardinal of Washington, D.C. Okay, there would be other local priests and such. So who would largely be the people coming to, it would be the high and mighty. It would be the powerful. And also some of the poor. I think it was in their introduction, it talks about, Chrysostom says at some point, that his congregation was, 10% filthy rich and 10% dirt poor. And then 80% in between. So, how much most of us would complain if God had bidden us first to examine all this, and then to give alms? A judge is one thing, an almsgiver is another. Charity is so called because we give it even to the unworthy. Even to the that is, even to those whose lifestyles, whose belief systems, whose manner of living, whose manner of dress, we might not agree with. We might not like. And I think you could even extrapolate. And I think Chrysostom would say, even if you saw him with the brown bag and the bottle, you still should give money to that person. Okay? Could be wrong, he might not say it, but I'm pretty sure he would. So if we meddle and interfere with the unworthy, not even the worthy will ever willingly come to us. But if we provide also for the unworthy, undoubtedly both the worthy and those who are worth, all of them together, will come into our hands. In other words, he's talking about, if you're going to give to all, because keep in mind, all are the least of these, okay, what does that do? That engenders trust. The language you two were using earlier about, your sociopathic Americans. What does it do? It creates a relationship where previously there was none. So that now maybe those who do suffer from want, etc., will be a little bit more trusting of others rather than, shying away and such. Need alone, next paragraph, need alone is the poor man's worthiness. That's why he's worth stopping by. Because he's poor. Because he needs something. If anyone at all ever comes to us with this recommendation, let us not meddle any further. Don't ask, why are you poor? Well, what happened to make you out on the street? Used to be a stockbroker. Now you're not. Why? Was it drugs? We do not provide for the manners, but for the man. That is just so mind-blowing. We show mercy on him not because of his virtue, but because of his misfortune, in order that we ourselves may receive from the Master his great mercy, in order that we ourselves, unworthy as we are, may enjoy his philanthropy. Because what does that word philanthropy literally mean?
Love of man.
Love of man. It doesn't mean I give money to, museums and art galleries and things like that. Okay? In the Orthodox Church, God is frequently referred to as a lover of mankind. Philanthropos. So, seeing Lazarus in the bosom of Abraham, the rich man says, Father Abraham, have mercy upon me and send Lazarus. Notice, he's not now asking, Lazarus is clean, right? You've washed him. You took care of those sores, because I don't want his finger dipping in water and have ooze, So why doesn't he address Lazarus? Chrysostom asks. Chrysostom says, I think it's because he was ashamed and blushed. Why? Because he never stopped for Lazarus. Now he has all eternity to ask for Lazarus to come. We do not say this to accuse Lazarus. Okay? Certainly, this is referring to the previous quote that I haven't read. Certainly he had no such attitude, far from it. That is, Lazarus doesn't look at Father Abraham and say, screw him! He didn't help me. He didn't give me anything. No. We say it that the rich man did not address him because he feared this, but called to Abraham, who was ignorant of what he thought had happened. In other words, the rich man addresses Abraham because Abraham doesn't know anything about Lazarus' previous dealings with the rich man. But the rich man completely knows how often he stepped over Lazarus to go outside his gate. So what did Abraham say? Son, you've received the good things due you in your lifetime. Okay? See the wisdom and kindness of the righteous man. He didn't say, inhuman, cruel, wicked man. After you treated the man so badly, now you want charity, mercy? No. What's he say? Son, you received the good things due to you. In other words, you got all the good stuff that was owed to you. All the good stuff that you earned. Okay? His punishment is sufficient. Let us not trample further on his misfortunes. Abraham doesn't, say, oh, you're going to really rot and, No, he just says, take what you got. So, he says it's not in my power to grant this. Why? Because I and Lazarus can't go from where we are to where you are. Well, why not? Lazarus and Abraham are in the quote-unquote bosom of Abraham, heaven. The rich man's in hell. What's he saying? There is a huge gulf between these two places. So why did he simply say, you've received your good things, but you have received the good things due to you? And Chrysostom says, that's another fruit to be picked for another homily. So let's leave this one, and I'm going to skip a few things I wanted to talk about and go on to the next one. And he says, middle of that long paragraph on page 57, I could have explained this whole parable to you in one day. And I don't think he means 24 hours. I think he means I could have dealt with this all in one homily. But I didn't want to say a lot and then leave you, because I wanted you to receive and hold on to my words accurately and to gain from this. And so he goes on and he talks about the value of reading the scriptures at home. And I was really thinking about this the other night when I was reading this. Because at the time that he's writing this, obviously, how do you get a copy of the scriptures?
Make one.
It's handwritten. Okay. Now, we do know, because there are thousands of fragments of New Testament letters and passages, etc., that exist still. We do know that it was widely copied. So it wouldn't necessarily be that each individual member of a parish or congregation would have a copy, but it probably was where there would be a copy in a church. Okay, so he goes on and he talks about the value of reading the Bible, and then he brings up an example. As if someone says, I'm too busy. What? Middle of page 58, the second paragraph. What are you saying? That attending to the scriptures is not for you because you're surrounded by a multitude of cares? And he essentially kind of says, you dolt. You're the one who should be reading it. Because what kind of cares are the monks surrounded by? Do they have to deal with their daily, weekly, monthly bills? Do they have to deal with all the problems of work, etc.? Not really. Look at the top of 59. Robert and I were talking about Chrysostom's language really sounds like an everyday, ordinary guy dealing with everyday, ordinary people. Listen to this. You, the one who says, I don't have time to read the scriptures, you stand continuously in the front rank, and you receive continual blows. You need more remedies, the remedies that the Bible provides. And then he gives us examples. Your wife provokes you, for example. Your son grieves you. Your servant angers you. Your enemy plots against you. Your friend envies you. Your neighbor curses you. Your fellow soldier trips you up. Often a lawsuit threatens you. Poverty troubles you. Loss of your property gives you grief. Prosperity puffs you up. Misfortune brings you down. Many causes and compulsions to discouragement and grief. Hello? At the very least, the Psalms would be good to kind of soothe your soul. Therefore, we have a continuous need for the full armor of the Scriptures. Now, you read all those things that he talks about, your wife, your son, your servant, etc. Where do you think he gets those from?
People.
Because he's a practicing priest. And he hears people's complaints. He hears people's problems. Okay? And he goes on and gives other examples of other kinds of problems that reading the scriptures can help deter. For example, the designs of the flesh attack more fiercely those who live in the midst of the world. Well, yeah. I mean, if you're living out in a cave in the desert, what other flesh do you come into contact with? Might be hairy old Joe from a mile down the road in the other, cave. A handsome face, a splendid body strikes us in the eyes. A shameful phrase piercing our ears, troubles the mind. What else? that which often seems the slightest of all these attacks. And he gives an example. The scent of perfume falling from courtesans as they pass somewhere nearby has captured and taken us away as prisoners by a mere accident. You're walking, there's a throng of people, and suddenly you go, ooh. And you start to just let the mind wander. Because keep in mind, how would most people who didn't use a perfume have smelled in 350, 370 Constantinople? Naturally. That's a good way of putting it. Naturally. Okay? So, and there are many things like these which besiege our souls. So we need the divine medicines to heal the wounds which we've received and to protect us. For it's not possible, kind of get the impression he wants to make it clear there, for anyone to be saved without continually taking advantage of spiritual reading. He says you cannot be saved. Why? Because it's therapy. It's what's cleansing to the mind and such. And then he goes on and he keeps talking about praise of reading scriptures. All right? Since I want to try and get through this. He says, okay, now let's go back to our parable. So let's talk about the next part of the parable on page 60. He says, look how much one parable has helped us. How much better it has made our souls. And I kind of imagine there's probably a few people in his audience who are going, maybe your soul, but man, we're getting bored. Get something new here. It's no little matter to pass one day in contrition for sin, to look towards the heavenly philosophy. Notice what he's suggesting here. Even if I've only gotten you to think about, let's say, eternity, for a moment, you are better off. What's he not saying here? He's not saying, come on down, accept the Lord Jesus into your heart, be saved. Nothing like that. This isn't an altar call kind of mentality. It's entirely, if I get you to think better, okay, then you are better off. So, back to the parable. So what does Abraham say again? And he quotes Abraham. And then he goes on and says, about 4 lines after that quote on page 61, but since we hear his words, Abraham's words, while we are still in this life, where it is possible to recover sobriety, to wash away our sins, to obtain confidence, to change ourselves for fear of the evils which have happened to others, let us give thanks to God who loves mankind, who awakens our sluggishness by the punishment of others and arouses us from sleep. So why does Christ tell us this parable? To keep us from suffering the same punishment. Not that image of Christ that you get in the late Middle Ages and later on as this great judge who wants to damn you to hell if you're having any fun. No, what does he say? We're told the parable to stop the punishment from happening. Notice, did the rich man get this advance warning? Not in this fashion. Okay. If the rich man was within the Jewish tradition, then he did. Okay. So, next paragraph, a few lines down. If this rich man was foul and repulsive, cruel and inhuman, that is, if he was everything I said he was in the previous homily, why did Abraham not say to him, you've received your good things? And stop there. Why did he say, you've received the good things due to you? As if there were debts owed to him. What does this mean? What do we learn from this? And so what does he say? Why were there these good things due to him? What did the rich man do in his life?
Probably something good at some point.
Bingo. In other words, he's not a walking Satan. He doesn't, not everything he does is bad. He probably went home and kissed his wife. That's a good thing. He probably played with his son if he had a son. That's a good thing. He might have been honest once or twice in a business deal. That would be a good thing. So he got the just recompense for the good things he did. All right? In fact, he even says, top of 62, middle of that paragraph in 62, top paragraph. It can happen that someone is licentious but often merciful, or inhuman but self-controlled. Or if one is both licentious and cruel, still it often happens he's done one good thing in his life. I mean, it's amazing, what you see and hear about quote-unquote horrible people. If you've ever seen the home movies of the Hitler family.
Yeah.
Hitler playing with his children.
Yeah, he was great with kids. The Goebbels children loved him.
Kind of scary, but what does that show? He's human. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't demon. He wasn't, in that sense, quote-unquote, possessed. Because if you're possessed, guess what? You're always possessed. Look at all the instances, for example, in the Gospels, of the people who are possessed. They're never in their right mind until they're exorcised, okay? So what does that show? It shows, there was still beauty and truth and some element of goodness, okay? He just happened to, like killing Jews on the side, and homosexuals, and Catholics, and gypsies, and, pretty much anybody else he had a problem with, okay? So, if it's probable that even the rich man had reached the extremes of wickedness, he'd done something good. So, here's what Abraham means. He means, if even you have done something good, and the reward for this is owed to you, you received all these things due to you in that world. Living in luxury and wealth, enjoying great prosperity and good fortune. And if this man has done something bad, that is, if Lazarus did do something bad, he received what was due to him in that world. In other words, he paid for it already. He's already had all the crap that is due to him happen on earth. Each of you has arrived here stripped naked. That is, the rich man and Lazarus. He, Lazarus, has arrived stripped naked of his sins. But you arrived what? Stripped naked of your virtuous actions. Why? Because if we were to draw a balance, and we're to write the rich man and write Lazarus, in Lazarus's balance, in his scales, he would have all kinds of virtuous deeds and a little bit of evil. And the virtuous deeds would outweigh the evil. But the evil is what he suffered on earth. And the rich man would have all kinds of evil and a little bit of virtuous deeds. And the virtuous deeds is what he enjoyed on earth. But the evil is what he now has to pay for. Therefore, page 63, first paragraph. When you see anyone living in wickedness but suffering no misfortune in this life, don't call him lucky. Think of mafia dons. Or other people that are crooks. Don't call that person lucky because they're not suffering. Weep and mourn for him. Because he's going to get it. He's going to get his just recompense. Maybe not here, but he will later. And if you see anybody here cultivating virtue, that is living virtuously, but suffering all kinds of problems. Just, the poor person can't get a break. I don't know if you've known anybody like this. I know a person who has a family member like this. The poor guy, it's like he steps out his front door and he gets hit by a car. He gets well, his kid goes to school and, has a problem. I mean, for the last 5 years, this poor family has just been literally one thing after another. And they've now got him in the hospital on suicide watch. I'd be there too. Because he can't take it anymore. Okay?
Incidentally, the introduction mentions purgatory, and I know the
Mentions purgation. It doesn't mention
Okay,
purgatory. Right.
My question is so in this period in church history, is there's the idea of purging of sins before entering heaven? Is there an idea of a purgatory? Or
There's not an idea of a purgatory per se. There is a notion of a purgatorial cleansing, of a purgation of sins. Yes.
So like Lewis's idea of purgatory.
Yeah. And there's an idea that, there is some idea, and you see this a little bit in Ephraim the Syrian, that, when one dies, one doesn't immediately go to heaven, that it might take a while.
Right.
And that taking of a while might be the purgation aspect. Some writers deal with that. Not a lot. It's kind of, it's like what I think it was Ephraim also said, that which we don't know about, we don't talk about. Because you're stepping out into unknown territory. Okay? So he says, if you see this person who seems to be virtuous, but they're suffering all kinds of problems, envy him. Because all his sins are being dissolved in this life. And a great reward for his endurance is being prepared in the next. Some people are punished only in this life. Others suffer no misfortune here, but receive all their due retribution in the next. Others are punished here and later. Who do you consider lucky? In the first place, I'm sure those who are punished here and put away their sins. I mean, it's almost like he wants to, okay, let's go around the room now. In the church, you, first pew. Which one do you think? And they're going, yeah, I want to be in that first group. Okay. Who's next then? Maybe you think that those who suffer nothing here, but endure all their punishment hereafter. He says, I don't think so. I think those who are punished both here and hereafter. Why? For he who pays some penalty here will experience a lighter punishment hereafter. In other words, if you die here on earth, and your life has been nothing but a ride, nothing but smooth sailing, it won't next time. It won't in the hereafter. So you better have some flat tires in this life. Okay? He who is forced to endure all his punishment hereafter will have an unmerciful judgment, like the rich man. Because the rich man, what's happening? He just wants a drop of water. Just a drop. Okay?
So basically he's saying that you can, I guess what I'm getting from this is that you can purge the same amount of sin in this life with less suffering in this life than you would otherwise experience in the hereafter. Because if it's the same amount of suffering either way, this much sin, this much suffering, then surely it wouldn't matter where you.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a 1-to-1. And bear in mind that the suffering in the hereafter doesn't end.
Well, except for in that, purgation.
But he doesn't talk about that.
Right.
He doesn't talk about that. I mean, your introduction mentions it, but in nothing in the 4 homilies that we've read so far does that idea even get addressed. Everything he says now is that what happens after one dies, it's forever. It's eternal.
Well, then in that case, surely the model he's suggesting here is that if you don't purge all your sins in this life, then you don't get into heaven. I mean, because obviously you're not going to be suffering in heaven.
Right.
So then, if there isn't a purgatory and there isn't,
But it's not necessarily where he's saying you are purging your sins. It's if you are suffering in this life. That's not necessarily you purging your sins.
Mhm.
That is you enduring. Okay, his whole point is not on purgation. It's on enduring and remaining faithful. It's not blaspheming, etc. I mean, I get your point that he's essentially saying you've got to die clean here. Yeah, that's his point. That's St. Basil's point. It's Ephraim's point. It's all of the Father's point
right?
that you're upon your death you have to be washed clean. That's the whole point of baptism.
Right.
Okay, but it's how does one appropriate and make real the baptism? Well, in the parable that he's talking, it's how Lazarus lives. How does Lazarus live? He never complains. He never moans. He just patiently endures. Okay? What does the rich man do when he has to suffer?
Complains.
He complains. The only problem is he's not going to get any relief. Where did Lazarus' relief come from? He died. He died here. Okay? But he endured much here. Now, notice what he says here. Lazarus endured much here, but how much quote-unquote evil? Probably not much. Why? Because he didn't have much opportunity.
Well, see, then my question, I guess, is that obviously, even a relatively faithful person, right, will have committed probably quite a few sins. I mean, not even like a little bit of sin. I mean, there's especially depending on at
Sure.
what point they decide to, change, turn to
Right.
repent. So then the question becomes, like, what if after repentance they don't have that kind of opportunity to endure suffering? Like, what if no suffering comes their way? No real,
Robert?
I mean, first off, Chrysostom really makes it clear that no suffering is not an option anyhow. There is no such thing as no suffering. I think he sets up pretty extreme points as a means of just kind of saying bad things are going to happen and just accept the bad things that happen. Even tries to put a positive spin that with each bad thing you're being purged or tested or refined. And so it's really about psychological orientation instead of a methodology.
Right, I understand, but I'm
Don't
kind of
look for bad things, but don't make it your life's goal to shy away from them either. Just take it.
And he's
Take it
also
as it comes.
suggesting, even, what you're talking about, don't look for bad things. Don't be like medieval Catholic monks who would take, self-flagellation. I mean, don't beat yourself. I once heard an Orthodox priest say, you don't have to beat yourself. If you want suffering, God will give it to you. Okay, my perspective would be live a little while. I mean, just live. It'll come.
Yeah.
One way or another, it'll come.
Just give it
I
a
mean,
chance.
give it,
It'll come to you.
I mean, I've not known, maybe you have. I've not known anybody who's never suffered. Because, what did he talk about even earlier? And he's going to talk about it later, too, I think, in the next one. Even the rich and the people who seem to have everything going for them, it's internalized. There's a lot of suffering going on in here. Because often, what is someone who's filthy rich thinking about?
getting more money.
Maintaining it, not losing it.
Yeah.
Okay? Finding those offshore accounts, finding the tax dodges, finding, how can I set up a foundation so that, the money still is in the family, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Why? Because they're concerned. Okay, so is that suffering? It's not suffering like some guy living on the street with open wounds and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, that kind of suffering can be more beneficial for others because others see that and they can go, ooh, I don't want to live like that. I don't want to have, okay? And it can be beneficial to them because they can try to do something to help that individual. Okay, but it doesn't mean that, people who don't have physical suffering aren't still somehow suffering. I mean, sheesh, look at the United States. I think I read something that it's something like 25% of Americans suffer some kind of mental health illness. Okay, now that can be everything, from multi-personality disorder to depression. But depression, has multiple levels, and depression can be really bad, and depression can just be constantly seeing the glass is half full.
You mean half empty?
Yeah, sorry. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Either way.
Half empty. Either way, it's still, it's not full. Okay? So he goes on and says, the next page, 64. If one who enjoys only God's forbearance does not make good use of it, okay? If one who enjoys only God's forbearance does not make good use of it, that is, God's forbearing to punish now, if he doesn't make good use of that, he's going to have a more severe retribution. He is saying God's got to pay you back what is owed to you. And keep in mind that owing can be both good and a bad. Okay. So, do you know that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? Completely opposite. I have no idea what that was. Completely opposite, again, of Jonathan. I almost said Jonathan Winters. Wow.
Who's Jonathan Winters?
He's a comedian.
Oh, you need to do a Google search.
Yeah.
It's one of the great comics of all time. Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of Angry God. Because how does that portray God? Man, he's just itching. God is just itching for you to screw up. So he can go, I'm going to dangle you over hell and you're going to burn and I'm going to enjoy it. No. When we see people living in wealth and luxury, scented with perfumes, passing the day in drunkenness, having great power and honor, great prestige and celebrity, and sinning and suffering no misfortune, he says, what should we do? Should we go, oh, they're, no. We should weep and mourn for them.
So,
Okay.
no, Jonathan Edwards, he was a reformed.
Jonathan Edwards, 18th century Puritan, American Puritan.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Punishment, not top of the next page. Punishment is not evil. No.
Wait,
Putting your
65?
child,
Oh, there it is.
putting your child in timeout, if that's what you do, that's not evil. The child taking the cookie when the child was told not to, that's evil. Okay, maybe it's not evil. It's wrong. You're going to burn for that cookie, Johnny.
Better enjoy it now.
Yeah, better enjoy that cookie now, because all eternity you're going to...
You'll have exactly one cookie worth of suffering in hell for that.
The latter, evil, the latter separates us from God. Okay, and that's what the church teaches evil as. It is a rupture of relationship. That, humanity was created to be in a relationship with God. And when the fall occurred in the Garden of Eden, what happened? That relationship was broken. Why? Because rather than looking at God, Adam and Eve turned and looked at the tree. Essentially, they turned and looked at themselves. Okay? So that relationship has been broken. So what's punishment designed to do? Heal the breach. Bring it back. So the former punishment leads us toward God and dissolves his anger. How do we know? And so he quotes Isaiah, "Comfort, comfort my people, O priests. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." Okay. And by the way, that's what the entire Old Testament is about. It's about Israel being told what to do and Israel starting to do it And then, being like your classical ADHD, oh, look! And going and following something else. And God always going, oh, man, come on. Wham! Slaps him upside the head. Come back. And every time, God tells him to come back, he always says, I want you to know that I am God. Follow me. And they, oh, sorry. We'll do better this time. They start to follow. And then, oh, look, a bunny. And they go off and they follow Moloch or they follow somebody else.
Was Moloch a bunny?
Moloch was a bunny that you sacrifice children to. Okay. Child sacrifice. And so what does God do? Wham! Slaps them upside the head. Brings them back. And so you see that pattern all the way. Beginning of Genesis to the very last book of the Old Testament. Okay? So, do you see how the punishment here, skip several lines, how the punishment here snatches us out of the retribution hereafter? That is, the punishment here is the smack, saying, come back. Because once you die, I can't smack you then. Once you die, you're left in what state? The rupture. There's no relationship. If you die in that state of not being in a relationship with God, that's the relationship you stay in forever. Okay? So, from the parable of Lazarus, this is clear, that if he had done any evil, he'd washed it away in this life and departed clean to the other life. And then he gives us, well, let's look at another parable then. Let's look at the story of the paralytic, the guy who'd been paralyzed for 38 years, in other words, from the day he was born. And what did Christ say to him? You are well, sin no more, that nothing worse befall you. In other words, when Christ heals him, what does that mean? You are well. In other words, you're clean. What does he say to the woman caught in adultery? Where are your accusers? They're all gone. So he says, I'm not accusing you of anything. Go and sin no more. She's clean. In other words, she was caught in adultery, ripped from the bed. They bring her out, they publicly have her, and he says, I'm not going to accuse you. Was she caught in adultery? Yes! Was she an adulteress? Yes! But no judgment. Talk about feeding those who are hungry, who might not be of our, social class or our behavior or So from these passages, it's clear. Some people are punished in this life and put away their sins. What's he talking? He's saying that guy who was a paralytic for 38 years, that was punishment for what was due him. Okay? For whatever wrongs he had done. Well, if he is paralyzed, how likely is it he got up and robbed a store? Not likely. But unfortunately, if you're really honest with yourself, where does most sin really occur? If you could turn this thing off, it'd be a lot easier. So, he goes on, and at the bottom of the page, and notice how he does this repeatedly. I know some of you are going to ask, well, is there nobody who enjoys both comfort here and hereafter? That is there nobody who lives life wonderfully here, who then goes to go on and live life wonderfully hereafter? No. No, it cannot be. It's impossible. It's not possible. You get the idea he wants to emphasize? Not likely. So, anybody who's living life smooth sailing here, they're going to suffer later. Because anyone who enjoys an easy life and freedom from want in this world, who continually, notice how he adds to this, who continually indulges himself in every way, who lives randomly and foolishly, it's impossible for that person to enjoy honor in the other world. Is he saying it's impossible to be rich and happy in this world and not to suffer joy or enjoy joy in the next? No. Because you can be rich and happy and still not live randomly and foolishly and indulgently. I know an individual, I was first told about it, I had actually met him a couple of times, but I know an individual who lives in the Middle Tennessee area who is filthy rich. And I mean filthy rich. The guy is so rich, he's trying to figure out ways to get rid of his money. And I'm talking mega bucks. Okay? Finding groups, organizations that he can donate it to. Because he has so much. Why? He's not wanting to live indulgently. Does he have a nice house? Oh, yeah. Okay. And I've known a variety of people like this, from when I was 10 years old to now, who have been extremely filthy rich. Guy used to, be a big dog at Apple Computer. Okay. This was before Apple Computer stock went up, $400, $500 a share. This was back in the 70s when it was like $15 and $20 a share. So, he says, if poverty does not trouble him, still desire troubles him. Desire for more stuff. And if he's afflicted because of this, it brings more than a little pain. It's no common task to bridle foolish desire. I think I've talked in here about the Greek word apatheia. Dispassion. Okay? It's no common task to bridle foolish desire, to stop vain glory. That is, to seek glory. Well, what does it mean in our world to seek glory? Fame. Maybe not even fame like, a best-selling novel, a movie.
Even notoriety seems to be okay.
Well, notoriety today is equal to fame. I mean, why do you have so many confession shows? People go on to Oprah and they spill their guts about, sleeping with their brother's wife and all this weirdness. Okay? Reality shows. I mean, I was at the doctor's a couple weeks ago and they had on the idiot box to drown out thought. And
the screams.
it was the Today Show or something, and they had Honey Boo Boo and her mother on. And I was trying to read something for this class, and I watched for like 3 minutes, and I thought, my God, that woman ought to be thrown in jail for what she is doing to this child. And this child, I don't care what your parenting techniques are or will be, this child needs to be taken out and beaten. I mean, this kid needs to be spanked. This kid needs to be taught there are limits. There are boundaries, and you don't step beyond these boundaries. You don't call your mother names, period. You don't behave rudely to your parent, period. Okay? And, let's just start from there and beat that into her little brain until she understands it. Yeah, no, this is going to go up on YouTube. I'm probably going to call from you. But at least NBC Universal can't have this pulled like they've had two of my other class lectures done.
Wait,
Two of my other class lectures, I had some YouTube material up on and NBC Universal had them pulled. Who am I for NBC Universal to care a rat's you-know-what for it? Please. Okay? So, he says to stop vainglory, to restrain presumption, to refrain from luxury, to persevere in austerity. In other words, if you can do that, that's huge. That's why he says it's no small task. Christ also made it clear that one who lives a relaxed life cannot reach the heavens. What does he mean, relaxed life? He's not talking Jimmy Buffett. This isn't laid back California style. What does he mean by relaxed?
not like like you said before, living randomly and foolishly.
Life's a struggle. That's what he means. Life is a struggle. Okay? So then how does Christ say, my yoke is easy and my burden's light? For if the road is narrow and difficult, how can he also call it light and easy? It's possible for even what is unendurable by nature to become light when we accept it with eagerness. So what does it come down to? Attitude. Attitude. You know, if you can accept what is happening, that makes it easier. But if you kick and scream against what is happening, it makes it all the harder. In the Harry Potter stories, last novel, Harry comes to learn he has to die. Sorry. He has to die.
He said it again.
He has to die. Right? But he learns what about that? It's entirely how he dies that matters. Does he die dragged, kicking and screaming into the forbidden forest? No. He walks in, head held high, chest thrown out. And the language that J.K. Rowling uses is the language of early Christians going into the arena to meet their deaths.
Wait, the Forbidden Forest, the unicorn killing centaur Forbidden Forest?
Yeah. That's where Voldemort is.
He has to die in there?
Yeah, it's where Voldemort is. He has to march to Voldemort.
Okay.
So, how does he do it? He's not dragged by a Death Eater. No, my mommy, you know. No. He marches right in and says, here I am. Take me. Okay? That's what he's talking about here. Just as the apostles who had been scourged returned rejoicing that they'd been found worthy to be dishonored for the name of the Lord. That's why Peter says, I'm not worthy to die in the same manner as my Lord. So what do? They crucify him upside down. Okay? Paul says, all desire to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted. What does Christ even say before he leaves? He says, you will suffer for my sake. Okay? One of the comments in the Beatitudes, blessed are those who are persecuted for my name's sake. Okay? He doesn't say blessed are those who are rich TV preachers who make $1 bazillion a year and have fancy cars and nice. We need great wisdom and perseverance to keep sober and watchful in prayer, not to desire others' property, but to distribute our goods to the needy, to reject and repudiate all luxury, whether of clothing or table, to avoid avarice, drunkenness, and slander, wish he'd left this one off, to control our tongue and keep from disorderly clamor, to abstain from shameful or witty talk. I wish our translator changed that, because with what I often do in class, I've caught myself thinking to abstain from whameful or shitty talk. If you want to learn how difficult it is to live wisely, and he quotes St. Paul, what do? I pummel my body and subdue it. And that takes us back to St. Ephraim, who talks about ascetic feats, fasting, vigil, prayer. Okay? When St. Paul said that, he hinted at the force and effort which those must use who wish to teach their bodies obedience in everything. Why are they teaching their bodies obedience? Because the body should follow the soul. The soul should be the director, the governor. The present life is an arena. See, now his audience, when they heard that, they would have gone, what? What's this? We're bringing back the Colosseum? They knew exactly what that language meant. If you remember, the beginning of the next homily, I thought we were farther along. The beginning of the next homily, he mentions, today we must finish the parable of Lazarus, and he talks about, what happened in the intervening days. Well, your gloss at the bottom, the footnote tells you on page 79, he's talking about Babylas and the others. Babylas, Bishop of Antioch, martyred under Decius in 250. Okay, feast day January 24th. Saints Juventius and Maximinus, martyred under Julian circa 362. Okay, now, Chrysostom was born in 350. He died in 407. Like I said, we don't know the exact date. I don't think your introduction mentions this. That he delivered these homilies.
Yeah, it mentioned that there's been different
Take
dates
it,
proposed.
take it back. 388 or 389. Okay, so we're talking 26 or 27 years after the deaths of Saint Juventius and Maximinus. All right? In other words, these people are within living memory. It was closer for them, for Chrysostom's audience, to these people's deaths than it is for us to Martin Luther King's death. Okay? Closer to them than it is for us to, Reagan's presidency, even. Okay? So I'm kind of get this. They'd be very, very familiar with the stories of these people. So when he says, lost my place. The present life is an arena. Okay, they're looking forward in the next week, coming up to the commemoration of these two saints. In the arena in an athletic contest, the man who expects to be crowned cannot enjoy relaxation. I saw somebody with a t-shirt today that said something to the effect of, "No one practices to lose." I don't know, and if I'm out running or I'm doing something, I don't do it because I want to be middling. I don't want to lose it because I want to be last. Nobody goes on The Voice, if you're familiar with the TV show, and sings really badly because they really like being in front of 20 million people and sounding like crap. It happens sometimes because of nerves. Okay? No. The present life is an arena. But how many discouragements come to us every day? How great a soul is needed not to desist through impatience or disgust, but to give thanks. How many of you, something bad happens, and you just want to hang your head and go crawl under a rock? Sometimes that's the best thing to do. But other times, you take that blow, you fall off that bicycle, and what do? You get back up. You dust it. Jason knows what I'm talking about. You get back up, you brush off the wound, and you go on. You step back into the arena. Okay? We must also fight back our evil thoughts and not permit our tongue to utter anything foul, just as the blessed Job. Job's wife even comes to him and says, "Curse God and die." And that's when Job says, "No, yet though he slay me, I will serve him." Even if God kills me, I'm going to remain faithful. So, he talks about some people, if they stumble at all, or are slandered by anyone, or fall ill with a chronic disease, what do they immediately do? They start to blaspheme. They get a bad paper grade. It's like the world's come to an end. They submit to the pain of the disease and then what? Deprive themselves of its benefit. How? What happens if you've ever experienced this? Something horrible happens to you and you let it get to you. What's the difference between that happening and something horrible happens to you and you accept it? What happens over the next few days in those two situations?
You're going to feel way worse if you let it get to you.
If you let it get to you, it just eats away. But if you accept it, if you deal with it, and what's the phrase? Move on. Not moveon.org. Move on. Okay? It no longer has control. What you are doing, man, blaspheming your benefactor, your savior, your protector, your guardian. In other words, God has allowed this thing to happen. Why are you blaming him? Why are you saying, oh, where's God when it hurts? The devil brings a multitude of misfortunes for this purpose. To what? To try to bring us down. Okay? And what happens when every time one of these misfortunes happens, you say instead, thank you for that happening? What? He stops because he realizes, damn, this isn't going to work. I'm not going to damn this person. Okay? In the same way, the devil continually gapes at us. Bottom of page 69. If you throw to him as to a dog some blasphemous word, he'll take it and attack you back again. But if you persevere in thanksgiving, you've choked him with hunger. Because he doesn't like those words of thanksgiving. And notice, St. John doesn't say, I don't expect you to be totally silent, but I expect you to give thanks. I expect you to worship instead of despair. Confess to the Lord. Cry out loudly in prayer. Okay? Out of habit, however, you get the impression again that this is the priest talking. The tongue often starts to utter that evil word. That dit comes out. Well, and what's he say to do? Bite your tongue. And he means it literally. Get that blood flowing. So you go, oh, you know. Because it's better to have a mouthful of blood than later to desire a drop of water and not to be able to obtain this relief. Wow, that's a striking image. Okay? God commanded you to love your enemies. Do you turn away from God who loves you when God might appear to be your enemy? He commanded you to speak good of those who curse you, to bless those who slander you. Do you speak ill of your benefactor and protector when you've suffered no wrong? He permitted it. Why? To improve your character. I talk about character a lot when I teach the Harry Potter stories, because the difference between Harry Potter and Dudley Dursley. Harry has character in spades. Dudley has no character. For the simple reason, Harry suffers all his life. Dudley has everything handed to him on a silver platter. Never suffers whatsoever. Okay? Which is easier, blasphemy or thanksgiving? Does not the one make your hearers hate you and cast them into despair, but the other brings you many crowns? So why do you neglect what's helpful, easy, pleasant? So, it is not the nature, top of 71, of our external circumstances, but our own choice, which causes one and the other. He's going to keep hitting this. It's not things that happen to us, ultimately, that determine retribution or joy. It's how we respond. Which is why no one can ever say, well, so-and-so made me do it. It's not my fault. It's so-and-so. No. Because our responses come from within. We choose how to respond. Yeah, someone might really make you angry. Someone just might make you boiling mad. But you still have the choice how to respond. That response might be boom, or that response might be something totally different. You have the choice to respond. So, even if all the evils of mankind come together, they will never condemn the soul of the wise man who loves God, nor persuade him to desist from virtue. Look at Lazarus. Okay? Look at Lazarus. Therefore, let's not say that poverty, disease, etc., these things force us to blaspheme. Broken down cars, run down homes, whatever. No. Folly, heedlessness, and absence of discretion. Those are the things that cause us to blaspheme. And where do all those reside? Inside. Okay? Well, someone asks, because he knows his audience. Why are some punished here, but others only hereafter, not here at all? He says, because if all were punished here, we'd all have perished. If all were punished here, guess what? We'd all be dead. That's why. For we are all subject to penalties. So for this reason, God punishes some here, but doesn't punish others. He punishes some, cutting short their evil ways, makes their retribution hereafter lighter, or even completely releasing them, making those who live in wickedness better by the punishment of these people. In other words, he uses pain and suffering for some people to waken others, to shake other people out of their lethargy, to say the old phrase, there but for the grace of God, go I. Okay? Like, I'll bet this happens. You're zipping down the road, and you see either up ahead or behind you those flashing blue lights. Yeah, almost every one of you just gave me a facial expression. Okay? It worked, didn't it? You see those blue lights? You let up on the gas. Or you put your foot down on the brake. Okay? Depends on where you are. So, we'll just stop there because we're almost out of time anyways. We'll pick up with 73